Irish mother lost in blizzard. With newborn twins, Lakota healers rescue. Led to love. Maeve had never imagined that her life would lead her so far from the green hills of Ireland to the wide, quiet plains of a new and unfamiliar land. She was still young, but the past few years had aged her in ways that could not be seen on the outside. After losing her husband to illness not long after their marriage, she had found herself alone and unsure of what to do next. When she learned that distant relatives had settled in America and were building a new life there, she made a brave choice. With a small bag of belongings and a heart full of worry and hope, she crossed the ocean. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but she kept reminding herself that she was doing this for a better future. By the time she reached the frontier, winter was already beginning to show its first signs. The air felt sharper than what she had known back home. The land stretched wide and open, with very few trees and even fewer houses. The town she arrived in was small, made up of wooden buildings and muddy roads. People worked hard there, and everyone seemed busy trying to prepare for the cold months ahead. Maeve stayed with relatives for a short time, but space was limited and money was scarce. Still, they did what they could to help her settle in. Not long after arriving, Maeve gave birth to twin boys. The birth was difficult, and the days that followed were filled with both joy and worry. She loved her sons deeply from the moment she held them, but she also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had no husband to share the burden, and though her relatives were kind, they were struggling too. Every night she lay awake listening to the wind outside and wondering how she would provide for her children. Yet each morning, when she looked into their tiny faces, she found strength she did not know she had. The town offered few opportunities for a young widow with newborn twins. There were whispers of work in a settlement farther away, a place where families were gathering and where someone had offered her a chance to help in a household once she arrived. The journey would not be easy, especially with winter coming fast, but waiting in the crowded town felt just as uncertain. After careful thought and many sleepless nights, Maeve decided she would travel before the weather became too severe. She packed what little she owned, wrapped her sons in warm blankets, and prepared to set out. On the morning she left, the sky looked heavy with clouds. The air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, but she believed she could reach the next settlement before the worst of the weather arrived. A kind neighbor offered her directions and a few extra cloths to keep the babies warm. With the twins bundled close against her chest and a small bag slung over her shoulder, Maeve stepped onto the open path leading away from the town. She walked slowly and carefully, keeping her eyes on the faint trail ahead. At first the journey felt manageable. The snow had not yet begun to fall heavily, and the land seemed quiet. Maeve walked steadily, stopping often to check on the twins. She spoke softly to them as she moved, as if her voice alone could keep them safe and calm. Hours passed and she felt tired but determined. She believed she would soon reach a farmhouse or some sign of shelter. But as the afternoon wore on, the wind began to rise. It started as a gentle push against her back, then grew stronger, colder, and more biting. The sky darkened faster than she expected. Thick clouds rolled in, and soon snow began to fall in large, swirling flakes. At first it seemed almost peaceful, but the snowfall quickly grew heavier. The path that had been visible only moments before began to disappear beneath the growing drifts. Maeve tried to keep moving in the same direction, but it became harder to tell where she was going. The wind howled across the open land, pushing snow into her face and making it difficult to see. She tightened her hold on the twins and pulled her shawl closer around them. As the storm grew stronger, Maeve's steps slowed. The cold seeped through her boots and into her bones. She could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Every few steps, she had to stop and catch her breath. She searched the horizon for any sign of shelter, but all she could see was white. The world had become a blur of snow and wind. Fear crept into her thoughts, but she pushed it aside. She told herself she had to keep going. For the sake of her children, she could not give up. After what felt like hours, Maeve spotted a small cluster of low trees in the distance. With the last of her strength, she made her way toward them. The trees offered only a little protection from the wind, but it was enough to make a difference. She sank down near their base, using her body to shield the twins from the worst of the storm. She checked their faces, relieved to see that they were still warm and breathing softly. She whispered to them, promising that everything would be all right, though she was no longer sure if that was true. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Snow piled up around her, and the wind continued to roar. Maeve fought to stay awake. She knew that if she let herself drift off, it might be dangerous. She shifted her position often, trying to keep the twins warm and protected. Her thoughts wandered to the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the ship crossing the ocean, the crowded town, and the hope she had felt when she first held her sons. She had come so far and endured so much. She could not let this be the end. Time seemed to lose meaning as the storm raged on. The light faded, and the world grew darker. Maeve's body felt heavy, and her eyelids drooped despite her efforts to stay alert. She held her children close, drawing strength from their presence. In that moment, she thought of all the people who had shown her kindness along the way. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, help might still come. But as the snow continued to fall and the wind howled across the empty land, she felt very small and alone in the vast winter night. Still, deep within her, a spark of determination remained. She focused on the steady rise and fall of her children's breathing and the faint warmth they provided. She told herself that she had survived every hardship so far, and that she would survive this too. Though the storm seemed endless and the cold unrelenting, Maeve refused to lose hope. Unbeknownst to her, her struggle had not gone unseen, and far beyond the curtain of snow someone else was moving across the land, following signs that would soon lead to her. The wind did not slow down. It moved across the open land with a deep, steady roar, lifting the snow and sending it spinning through the air. Maeve sat near the small cluster of trees, her back against the rough bark, her arms wrapped tightly around her newborn twins. She tried to keep them as warm as she could by pulling her shawl and coat around them. Every few moments she leaned down and checked their tiny faces, making sure they were still breathing calmly. She spoke to them in a soft, shaky voice, whispering little promises and prayers, hoping that somehow her words would keep them safe. Her hands had grown stiff from the cold. She rubbed them together and then gently touched the baby's blankets to make sure they were not too cold. The snow had started to gather on her shoulders and in her hair. She brushed it away again and again, but more kept falling. Time seemed to move slowly. She could not tell how long she had been sitting there. The sky was a dull gray, and the light was fading. The world around her looked the same in every direction, covered in white and moving with the wind. Maeve tried to stand once or twice, thinking that if she kept walking she might find help. But every time she rose to her feet, the wind pushed against her, and the deep snow made it hard to move. She felt weak and tired. Her legs trembled, and she worried that if she tried to go too far, she might fall and not be able to get up again. So she stayed where she was, hoping that the trees would give her some protection until the storm passed. She did not know if anyone would come, but she held on to the thought that she must keep going for her children. Far across the snowy land, another traveler was moving carefully through the storm. His name was Chaska. He was a Lakota healer who had spent the earlier part of the day gathering herbs and roots before the storm grew too strong. He had planned to return to his community before nightfall, but the wind had risen quickly, and the snowfall had grown heavy. Still, he knew the land well. He had walked these plains since he was young and understood how to read the signs of the weather and the ground. He wore thick clothing made for winter travel and carried a small sled behind him with supplies and furs. As he made his way back, Chaska noticed something unusual in the snow. At first it was just a faint line, almost hidden by the drifting flakes. He slowed his steps and bent down to look more closely. There were footprints, not from an animal but from a person. The prints were uneven, sometimes deep and sometimes light, as if the person had been struggling to walk. He looked ahead and saw that the tracks moved in a direction that did not lead to any nearby settlement he knew of. A feeling of concern grew inside him. In a storm like this, anyone caught outside without proper shelter would be in great danger. He followed the tracks carefully. The wind had already begun to cover some of them, but enough remained for him to see the path. As he walked, he noticed smaller marks near the larger footprints, as if something had been carried close to the ground. He wondered if the traveler might have been holding something heavy or precious. The storm made it difficult to see far ahead, but Chaska trusted his instincts. He moved steadily, pulling his sled behind him, the runners sliding softly over the snow. After some time, he spotted the outline of a few low trees in the distance. As he approached, he saw a figure sitting near their base. For a moment he could not tell if the person was moving. He stepped closer, calling out softly to avoid startling them. The wind carried his voice away, but he tried again. When he reached the trees, he saw Maeve. She was pale and exhausted, her eyes half closed, but her arms were wrapped tightly around two small bundles. Even in her weakened state, she was holding them close, shielding them from the cold. Chaska moved quickly but gently. He knelt beside her and checked the babies first, making sure they were breathing and still warm. He could see that Maeve had done everything she could to protect them. He spoke in a calm and reassuring tone, though he was not sure she could understand his words. His voice was steady, meant to bring comfort rather than fear. Maeve stirred slightly and opened her eyes just enough to see that someone was there. Relief flickered across her face, though she did not have the strength to speak. He took extra furs from his sled and wrapped them around the twins, adding more layers to keep them warm. Then he carefully helped Maeve onto the sled. She was weak and could not stand on her own for long. He made sure she was secure and that the babies were protected within the folds of the blankets and furs. The wind still blew hard, but Chaska knew he had to move quickly. Staying out in the storm any longer would be dangerous for all of them. He began to pull the sled, leaning into the wind and using his knowledge of the land to guide him. The journey back to his community would take time, but he knew of sheltered paths and natural landmarks that could help him find the safest route. Step by step, he moved forward. The snow was deep and the wind pushed against him, but he did not stop. He kept his focus on the path ahead and on the lives depending on him. Every so often, he paused to check on Maeve and the twins, making sure they were still warm and safe. Maeve drifted in and out of awareness. She felt the movement of the sled and the presence of someone helping her, but everything seemed distant, like a dream. She heard a voice at times, calm and steady, and she held on to that sound. It gave her a sense of safety she had not felt since the storm began. Though she did not know where she was being taken, she sensed that she was no longer alone. After many slow and careful steps, the storm began to ease slightly. The wind did not stop, but it grew less fierce. Shapes started to appear through the snowfall. Low structures and the faint glow of firelight came into view. Chaska had reached the edge of his community. As he approached, a few people stepped out to help. They saw the sled and hurried forward, bringing more blankets and guiding him toward a warm lodge. Inside, the air was filled with warmth from a central fire. Maeve and the twins were gently carried in and placed near the heat. Dry blankets were wrapped around them and warm drinks were prepared. The room was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the soft voices of those offering help. Though Maeve was still very tired, she felt the warmth around her and the careful hands making sure she and her children were safe. The storm continued outside, but within the lodge there was calm and safety. Chaska stayed nearby, watching over them and making sure they had everything they needed. He knew that the hardest part of the night had passed. The rescue had come just in time. What had begun as a simple journey across the plains had turned into a moment that would connect lives in a way none of them could have expected. When Maeve opened her eyes again, the first thing she noticed was warmth. It wrapped around her like a soft blanket, so different from the biting cold she remembered from the storm. For a moment she did not know where she was. The air smelled of wood smoke and something herbal, gentle and calming. She could hear quiet voices nearby and the soft crackle of a fire. She blinked slowly, trying to focus, and then she felt the small, familiar weight resting beside her. She turned her head and saw her twin boys sleeping peacefully, wrapped in thick blankets. Relief washed over her. She reached out with shaky hands and touched them, making sure they were real and safe. They stirred slightly but did not wake. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear this time, but from the deep relief that they had survived. She looked around the room. The walls were made from natural materials, and the light from the fire gave everything a warm glow. A few people sat nearby, speaking softly. Their expressions were calm and kind. Chaska was there too. He noticed when Maeve woke and stepped closer, moving quietly so as not to startle her. He offered a small bowl of warm liquid, something that smelled like herbs. Maeve did not understand his words, but she understood the care in his tone. She accepted the bowl and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her, easing the tightness in her chest. She nodded slightly to show her thanks. Though they did not share a language, kindness was clear in every gesture. The days that followed moved slowly. Maeve spent most of her time resting and regaining her strength. The twins slept often, waking only to eat and be held. Members of the community came and went quietly, checking on them, bringing food and adding more wood to the fire. Maeve began to notice the rhythm of life around her. People worked together, sharing tasks and helping one another. Even in the cold of winter, there was a sense of warmth and cooperation. At first, Maeve felt unsure and shy. She was a stranger in a place that was new to her. She worried about being a burden, but each time she tried to sit up and help, someone gently encouraged her to rest. They smiled at her and at the twins. They made space for her without hesitation. She realized that they did not see her as an outsider in need of pity, but as someone who needed care for a time. That simple understanding helped her relax. Chaska visited often, checking on her health and the babies. He brought herbal teas and sometimes small bundles of plants that he used to make soothing drinks. Maeve watched him work and saw how careful he was. He moved with quiet confidence, and people respected him. Though they could not speak much, they began to understand each other through small actions. When he handed her something, she would smile and nod. When she needed help, she would gesture gently. Bit by bit, a sense of trust grew between them. As Maeve regained strength, she started to sit up for longer periods. She watched the daily life around her with interest. Children played quietly near the fire. Adults worked with tools and materials, preparing for the coming days. Food was shared, and stories were told in soft voices. Though she did not understand the words, she could hear laughter and feel the sense of community. It reminded her of home in some ways, though everything looked different. One morning after several days of rest, Maeve carefully stood up. Her legs felt weak at first, but she steadied herself. She walked a few steps, holding on to a nearby support. A woman from the community noticed and smiled warmly, offering her an extra shawl. Maeve accepted it with gratitude. She sat near the fire with the twins and watched as others worked. She felt a quiet desire to help, even in small ways. When she could, she folded cloths or rocked one of the babies to sleep while someone else prepared food. The twins began to grow stronger. Their cries became louder and their eyes stayed open longer. They looked around with curiosity, taking in the new world around them. People in the lodge often paused to look at them and smile. One of the older women gently touched their tiny hands and spoke softly, as if welcoming them. Maeve felt a deep sense of comfort knowing that her children were cared for by many kind hearts. As days turned into weeks, the storm outside came and went in waves. Travel remained difficult, and it was clear that leaving right away would not be safe. Maeve accepted that she would stay for a while longer. Instead of feeling trapped, she began to feel grateful for the time to heal. She learned simple words and gestures to communicate. A shared smile, a nod, or a helping hand spoke louder than language. Chaska sometimes sat near the fire after his daily tasks were done. Maeve noticed that he often worked quietly, preparing herbs or checking supplies. One evening she gathered the courage to show him a small item she had kept in her bag, a worn piece of cloth from her homeland. She held it up and said a few words about where she came from. Though he did not understand the details, he listened with respect. He then pointed to the land outside and spoke gently, telling her about the place they were in. Even without full understanding, they shared something meaningful in that moment. The exchange of stories and the recognition of each other's journeys. Over time, Maeve felt her strength return. She helped more around the lodge, carrying small items, tending to the twins, and offering what she could. Each day she grew more comfortable. The sense of fear she had felt during the storm slowly faded, replaced by a quiet gratitude. She realized that she had been given not only safety but also a chance to pause and breathe after a long stretch of hardship. The twins became a bridge between her and the community. Their smiles and soft sounds brought joy to everyone around them. When they cried, someone would always help soothe them. Maeve saw how they were welcomed without question. This simple acceptance touched her deeply. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of responsibility by herself. Now she felt supported in a way she had not expected. As winter slowly began to ease, the days grew a little brighter. The snow still covered the ground, but there were moments when the sky cleared and sunlight shone through. Maeve would sit near the entrance of the lodge and look out at the land. It was vast and quiet, but it no longer felt as frightening as it had during the storm. Instead, it felt like a place where something new might begin. She often thought about the path that had brought her there. The long journey from her homeland, the birth of her twins, the difficult decision to travel in winter, and the storm that had nearly taken everything. Yet here she was, safe and surrounded by people who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. The memory of being found in the snow stayed with her, but it no longer filled her with fear. Instead, it reminded her of how close she had come to losing hope, and how that hope had been restored. Chaska and Maeve continued to grow more comfortable around each other. They spoke in simple words when they could, and relied on gestures when they could not. He showed her the plants he used for healing and explained as best he could their purposes. She listened with interest and respect. In return, she shared small stories of her past through gestures and simple drawings in the dirt near the fire. Each exchange brought a little more understanding. Though she knew that one day she might have to decide where to go next, Maeve did not rush the thought. For now she focused on healing, caring for her children, and appreciating the kindness she had received. The lodge had become a place of safety and quiet growth. The storm that had once filled her with fear had led her to this unexpected refuge. And as the days passed, she began to feel that perhaps this place and these people would play a larger role in her life than she had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, the deep winter slowly began to soften. The wind was still cold, and snow still covered much of the land. But there were moments when the sky opened and sunlight spread across the wide plains. Maeve noticed these changes with quiet attention. She had grown used to waking up in the warm lodge, hearing the gentle sounds of daily life around her. The steady rhythm of the community had become familiar, and she no longer felt like a visitor who did not belong. Each morning she wrapped her twins in thick cloth and held them close while she stepped outside for a short time. The air was still sharp, but it no longer felt as harsh as it had during the storm. She watched as people prepared for the coming season. Some repaired tools, while others gathered supplies or checked the nearby paths. Everyone seemed to work together, sharing tasks and offering help without needing to be asked. Maeve admired this sense of unity. It reminded her of the small village she had left behind, where neighbors relied on one another through difficult times. Her strength had fully returned by now. She could walk without feeling weak, and could help with small chores inside the lodge. She folded blankets, helped prepare simple meals, and cared for her twins with renewed energy. The babies had grown stronger too. Their eyes followed movement around them, and they often made soft sounds that brought smiles to those nearby. They were healthy and warm, and Maeve felt a deep sense of gratitude for that. Every time she looked at them, she remembered how close she had come to losing everything in the storm. The thought made her hold them a little tighter. Chaska continued to check on her and the twins. Though he was busy with his own responsibilities, he always found time to stop by and see how they were doing. Their conversations remained simple, built on gestures and a few shared words, but they understood each other more with each passing day. He showed her how to prepare certain herbs for warmth and comfort. She listened carefully and tried to learn. In return, she shared stories of her past through small drawings or by pointing to objects that reminded her of home. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly for the first time in many days, Maeve stepped outside and watched the light reflect off the snow. Chaska joined her, standing a short distance away at first. He pointed toward the open land and spoke gently, explaining that the weather would soon allow travel again. The paths would become clearer, and people would begin to move between settlements. Maeve understood what he meant. The time would come for her to decide what to do next. That thought stayed with her for many days. At night, after the twins had fallen asleep, she sat quietly by the fire and thought about her journey. She remembered the small town where she had first arrived, the promise of work in a distant settlement, and the plan she had made before the storm changed everything. She had believed she would travel there, find work, and build a new life on her own. But now, after everything that had happened, she was not sure what the right path was anymore. The community around her had shown her kindness without hesitation. They had given her shelter when she had nothing, cared for her children as if they were their own, and asked for nothing in return. She had found safety and a sense of belonging that she had not expected. The thought of leaving filled her with mixed feelings. Part of her still felt a duty to continue the journey she had planned. Another part of her wondered if perhaps her path had changed for a reason. Chaska sensed her uncertainty. One evening he sat near the fire and spoke to her in a calm, steady tone. He used simple words and gestures to explain that when the weather improved, he could guide her safely to the settlement she had been heading toward. He wanted her to know that she would not be left to travel alone again. Maeve listened carefully. She appreciated his offer and understood the care behind it. She nodded, showing her gratitude, but inside she felt a quiet hesitation. Over the next few days, she paid closer attention to the life around her. She saw how the community supported one another through both good times and hard moments. Children laughed and played near the lodges. Adults worked side by side, sharing food and stories. There was a strong sense of respect for the land and for each person's role within the group. Maeve began to realize how much this environment had helped her heal. It was not just a place of safety, but a place where she felt seen and valued. She also noticed how her twins had become part of this daily life. They were greeted with smiles wherever she went. People paused to check on them, to rock them gently, or to speak softly to them. The babies responded with bright eyes and small sounds of contentment. Maeve felt that they too had found a kind of home here. The thought of taking them away from this warmth and starting over somewhere else made her pause. One morning, as the sky turned a clear, pale blue and the snow glistened in the sunlight, Maeve walked a little farther from the lodge than she had before. She stood on a small rise and looked out over the land. It stretched wide and quiet, full of both beauty and challenge. She thought about the storm that had brought her here and the rescue that had saved her life. If not for that moment, she might never have met the people who now surrounded her with care. Chaska approached quietly and stood beside her. For a while, they both looked out at the land without speaking. Then he gently asked, through simple words and gestures, what she wished to do when travel became easier. Maeve took her time before answering. She explained as best she could that she was grateful for everything she had been given. She spoke of her original plan to find work in another settlement, but she also shared that she felt safe and supported here in a way she had not felt in a long time. He listened carefully, giving her space to express her thoughts. When she finished, he nodded and said that whatever choice she made, he would respect it. He wanted her to know that she and her children would always be welcome. His words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. Maeve felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire or the sun. In the days that followed, she continued to help around the lodge and care for her twins. She no longer felt the same urgency to leave. Instead, she allowed herself to consider staying longer. She thought about how she could contribute, how she could learn from the people who had helped her, and how her children might grow in a place where they were already loved. The idea of building a life there began to feel less like a temporary solution and more like a real possibility. Her connection with Chaska also grew stronger, though it remained gentle and unspoken. They worked side by side at times, sharing quiet moments and small smiles. There was no rush, no pressure, just a steady understanding that had formed through shared experience and mutual respect. Maeve admired his patience and his calm presence. He, in turn, respected her strength and determination. As the last of the harsh winter days passed, Maeve felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had arrived in this land with uncertainty and fear. She had faced a storm that nearly took everything from her. Yet she had also found kindness, safety, and the chance to begin again. Now, as she stood on the edge of a new season, she knew that whatever decision she made would shape the future for her and her children. And for the first time in a long while, that future felt full of hope. As spring approached, the snow began to melt slowly across the wide plains. Small green shoots pushed through the white blanket that had covered the land for months. The sun grew warmer, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and life returning. Maeve noticed the changes each day as she stepped outside with her twins. The world that had once seemed cold, harsh, and unwelcoming now appeared alive, full of possibility. She had grown stronger and more confident. Her children thrived in the warm, caring environment, their laughter filling the lodge and lifting the spirits of everyone around them. Life had settled into a new rhythm. Maeve spent her days caring for the twins, helping with household tasks, and observing the daily routines of the community. She learned slowly but steadily, watching how the people worked together, shared meals, and taught the younger children. There was a gentle order to everything. Each person contributed in small ways, yet all were valued equally. Maeve found comfort in this rhythm. It reminded her that life could be steady, even in a place far from the home she had once known. Chaska continued to be near, though always respectfully. He guided her in small tasks and showed her how to prepare herbal remedies and other simple necessities. Though they spoke in only a few words and gestures, Maeve understood more with each day. She appreciated his patience, the quiet strength he displayed in all he did. Chaska admired Maeve's courage, her ability to recover from the storm, and the gentle way she cared for her children. Over time, a quiet bond grew between them. It was not rushed, and there were no grand declarations, only shared moments, small acts of kindness, and a mutual respect that deepened with each passing day. Maeve thought often about her life before the storm. She remembered the journey from Ireland, the birth of her twins, the long hours of worry and uncertainty, and the moment she had been found in the snow. That memory, which once brought fear and despair, now brought a sense of wonder. The rescue had changed the path of her life entirely. It had brought her to this place, to people who had shown her compassion and care, and to a man who shared her sense of responsibility and love for her children. She realized that what she had thought of as an ending had instead become a new beginning. As days turned into weeks, Maeve's connection to the community grew stronger. She learned more about their traditions, their ways of living in harmony with the land, and the respect they held for each other. She shared her own stories of Ireland, of the journey she had made, and of her hopes for the future. The people listened, even if they did not always understand her words. Through gestures, drawings, and shared tasks, they welcomed her experiences as part of their own shared life. The twins, too, began to understand the rhythms of the lodge. They laughed, reached out to others, and grew comfortable in a world that had once seemed so uncertain. Chaska and Maeve found comfort in each other's presence. They would sit near the fire together, sometimes speaking, sometimes in silence, sharing small moments of connection. He taught her about the land, the herbs, and the ways of his people. She taught him about her homeland and the customs she remembered from her youth. Their bond was built slowly, like the careful layering of blankets to keep warm on a cold night. It was steady, dependable, and full of quiet understanding. As the snow finally melted, Maeve faced a choice she had been avoiding. She could leave and continue the journey she had originally planned, finding work and trying to build a life elsewhere. Or she could remain with the community that had saved her and helped her children thrive. She thought long and hard about the decision. She thought about the twins and how they had grown stronger in this place. She thought about Chaska, the kindness of the people around her, and the warmth she now felt in her heart. In the end, Maeve chose to stay. It was not a decision made lightly, but one guided by both reason and feeling. She realized that home was not just a place on a map, but a feeling of safety, belonging, and love. She wanted her children to grow up surrounded by care, in a place where they were truly welcome. She wanted herself to live in a place where she could be strong, supported, and part of something larger than her own individual struggle. The community welcomed her choice without question. Maeve took on new responsibilities within the lodge, contributing her energy and skills to help others. She learned more about the customs and practices of the people around her, and grew to respect the balance and harmony with which they lived. The twins continued to thrive, their days filled with play, learning, and laughter. Maeve watched them often, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Chaska's presence became a quiet constant in her life. They worked together, shared responsibilities, and spent long hours talking about small things or simply sitting in silence by the fire. The bond between them grew naturally, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the gentle understanding that comes from surviving hardship together. There were no grand announcements, only steady, lasting care and attention to one another. Over time, their connection deepened into a form of love that was patient, strong, and unwavering. The story of Maeve and her twins became part of the community's history. People spoke of how the Irish mother had been caught in the storm, how she had been rescued, and how she and her children had found a new life among them. It was a tale told around fires, a story of resilience, courage, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. But for Maeve, it was not just a story. It was her life, full of small joys, steady responsibilities, and the quiet happiness of belonging. Seasons changed, and life continued. Maeve's children grew healthy and strong, learning both the ways of their mother's homeland and the teachings of their new community. They laughed, explored, and became part of the shared life around them. Maeve found purpose in teaching them, helping them understand the balance of respect, kindness, and courage that had guided her own journey. Years later, when travelers passed through the region, they would sometimes hear the story of Maeve and the twins. It was a story of survival and of love born from compassion. But for Maeve, the greatest gift of that storm was not the tale itself. It was the life that followed. She had found safety, belonging, and love. The storm had brought loss and fear, but it had also brought the chance for a new beginning, one that would shape the rest of her life and the lives of her children. In the quiet moments by the fire, watching her children sleep and feeling the steady presence of Chaska beside her, Maeve knew she was home. Her journey, once marked by fear and uncertainty, had led to hope, connection, and a life filled with care. The rescue in the blizzard had been more than survival. It had been the first step toward a life she could never have imagined, a life full of love, warmth, and belonging. And so Maeve embraced each day, grateful for the storm that had once threatened to take everything, knowing it had brought her something far greater, a family, a home, and a future filled with possibility.